With pre-season testing right around the corner in a mere matter of hours, I thought it'd be really interesting to give my take on what to look out for during this year's pre-season testing. So, without further ado, here are my top 5 things to watch out for in pre-season testing. Number 1, and I think this is one of the main talking points for a lot of people, is whether the Mercedes will still be porpoising. In a response to this question, George Russell had this to say of it. "We'll see next week," he said with a smile after this initial shakedown of the W14 at Silverstone last week had taken place. As far as porpoising goes, it's really going to be interesting to see if any teams have pushed their solutions far enough to trigger some bouncing problems, or if the new floor rule changes over the winter have indeed done what the FIA hoped it would, which is of course to stamp out entirely any signs of porpoising. But, as we all know, with Mercedes it is extremely important that they have got on top of this, because if they haven't, they're going to have another season of pain, or at least another half season of pain, because I'm sure within their kind of pipeline of updates, they're going to have a sort of B-spec car to, put on if they do run into the porpoising phenomenon that plagued them throughout 2022. I think they would then go down the route most likely, depending on obviously the internals and the internal packaging layout, along the route of either Red Bull or Ferrari. And just another whole point with the Mercedes W14, there's already a few rumours going around that they haven't quite made the gains they were hoping for, and they're going to be starting the season off on the back foot in terms of pure competitiveness against the likes of Red Bull and Ferrari. But they have said on many an occasion now over the last week, they have indeed got a raft of updates that they will be bringing throughout the first 4 to 5 races of the season. So that should bring performance naturally with them and hopefully towards the front of the grid, if they aren't there already. Number 2, the Red Bull RB19. What exactly are Red Bull up to with their car? After Red Bull's mockery of a launch season unveiling the so-called RB19 2.5 weeks ago, it's time for us all to see the real thing in the flesh. Not that show car that they put out there of basically the RB18 in 2023 livery. Now, it's not going to be just us that's intrigued by what Red Bull have done over the winter. It's of course going to be the entire Formula 1 paddock. Everyone is going to be wanting to see what they've come up with, what solutions they've incorporated into this year's RB19 to make it even more dominant than it was towards the back end of last season, or really in fact the entirety of it. Now, one thing to note is I do not believe Red Bull will be playing around when it comes to this year's preseason testing, because as we all know, this is a single 3-day test this year. So the chances are that the car that breaks cover tomorrow will be in fact the main car that will be racing at the beginning of this year. So I think it's going to be extremely close to what races literally next weekend as well. Number 3. Will Aston Martin make a big leap? Now, with every preseason testing, there's always rumours between the teams about what wind tunnel numbers are saying for each car, and they are, of course, to be treated with a large pinch of salt. But, having said that, there is one reoccurring rumour over the last few weeks that has kept on popping its head up time and time again, and that is to do with the Aston Martin's AMR 23, with these wind tunnel numbers suggesting that this car is very good. Very, very good. Now, I'm not talking just good in terms of midfield team standards. Oh, no. But actually really good in terms of a competitive car good. Now, when I say a competitive car good, I'm talking along the likes of where Alpine were last year at certain points, because they, to me, had a really competitive car outside of the big three. And, they did finish in 4th place to, cement that status as best of the rest. But I believe these so-called numbers and rumours are even further competitive than that of last year's Alpine. I would go as far as to say we're talking numbers close to the top teams. Now that could be quite a surprise to see Aston Martin make that big of a leap over the winter. And also kind of ironic because let's face it, Sebastian Vettel was fed up with the team not giving him a car capable to challenge towards the front, if not at the front. And it would be really ironic if this car in particular, the season he retires from Formula 1, ends up being the car he's kind of wanted all along, and he ends up having to sit out and watch him from afar, Fernando Alonso at the forefront of this season. And that also is another thing to, add into this. We would have the Alonso factor to consider with him being at the front. And we all know what a competitive Fernando Alonso brings to the table. So yeah, this could be really interesting to see how this plays out. And not only that, just to what level and degree are these wind tunnel rumours proved to be true? Because there is a precedence when it comes to this with the Brawn of 2009. Number 4, will there be enough running? And now this is something that's really going to be telling for quite a few drivers and quite a few teams up and down the paddock, because let's face it, even with Fernando Alonso, yes, I'm going back to Fernando Alonso, the most experienced F1 driver of all time, he's already complaining about the lack of pre-season running. So try to equate that into how tough that must be for rookies. For Alonso, he spent 20 years in F1, but he's moving and jumping team over the winter, and he's only going to get 1.5 days of testing this new Aston Martin. Now, add into that fact, how much more tougher is this going to be for rookies having to do that? We've got the likes of Oscar Piastri at McLaren, Logan Sargent at Williams, and Nick de Vries at AlphaTauri, although to a lesser degree, of course. But it's not just those drivers we have to think about. We also have to think about Nico Hülkenberg at Haas. Yes, he's been in the car twice over the last season, but without that, he has gone many a year now without having driven a Formula 1 car for an extended period of time, and that's not going to be easy even for the likes of him. And finally, we're going to be getting the first signs of the pecking order. So yes, as you can imagine, the teams aren't going to have that much time to kind of play around with engine settings, fuel loads. They're going to have to get right down to business. It's going to be long runs from the get-go. It's going to be fine-tuning of the cars from the get-go. And of course, they do have to get on top of all the kind of niggles and gremlins that might be in the cars naturally at the beginning of their cycles. And of course, with this less time to play with comes less time to mess around. And so we're going to get very quickly, I think, the signs of what the pecking order is going to be. Now, I do not expect to see major changes in how the pecking order looks. I think we're going to have Red Bull at the top, followed quite closely by the likes of Ferrari and Mercedes. Now, other than that, I think we're going to get a sort of interesting pecking order behind that. I think we're going to have the likes of both Alpine and I'm going to put the Aston Martin in that same bracket. They're kind of going to be 4th and 5th, and I think they're going to contest that spot throughout the course of the season. And then further down, we've got the likes of AlphaTauri, Alfa Romeo, and the Haas and Williams teams, and I think that's kind of the pecking order it's going to be. That is today's video, guys. I hope you've all enjoyed it. If you have, leave a like on the video, subscribe if you're new around here. And of course, any comments, do leave them down below in the comments section. Alright guys, we are a couple of days out from pre-season testing, so I will catch you all towards the end of the week.